The alert woke me at what my body insisted was the middle of the night, though ship time meant nothing in the black between systems. Emergency lighting pulsed red across the ceiling of my berth. I had 40 seconds of training-mandated response time before the pod would start flooding with stimulants, and I spent 38 of them getting into my coveralls and boots. The alert was off. I caught it while sealing my collar tabs. The sound cycling through the speakers didn't match any code from 14 months of transit drills. A few seconds later, I understood why. It wasn't an alert tone at all. It was a voice, a fragment of speech, looped and compressed, playing where the emergency klaxon should have been. "Look at me." 3 syllables. Feminine, maybe, or synthetic. The pitch shifted slightly each time it repeated, as if the recording were decaying in real time. "Look at me." I stepped into the corridor and started towards the bridge. Evacuation protocol during unidentified alerts was simple. All crew to command stations, await briefing, follow senior officer instructions. I had run the drill 9 times during our first month out of Ganymede Station. The route lived in my muscles. Left at the junction, straight through the transit corridor, up 2 decks via the central shaft, right at the officers' quarters, into the bridge. I could have walked it asleep. I was 4 minutes into that walk when I realized something had gone wrong with the ship. The corridors felt different. The structure looked intact. No breaches, no buckling, but the spaces had shifted. A junction I passed through every day on my way to the monitoring station now stretched deeper than it should, the ceiling a meter higher than my memory insisted. Lighting panels were spaced unevenly. The emergency strips on the floor curved in directions that didn't match the deck beneath them. I stopped at a pressure door and checked the panel beside it. Deck 7, Section 4. Correct. According to the systems, I was on the right path. The door opened onto a room that had no business existing. A child's bedroom. The walls were the same grey composite as the rest of the ship. The floor the same textured polymer that kept you from slipping in low gravity. The contents were wrong. A bed, small, sized for someone 8 or 9, sat in the centre, its frame fused to the deck plates as if it had grown out of them. A dresser stood against the far wall, drawers made from repurposed cargo panel material. On top of the dresser sat a lamp shaped like a cartoon animal I didn't recognize, and beside it, a photograph in a frame. I stayed in the corridor and kept my eyes off the photograph. The door cycled shut. I turned and walked the other way. The transit shaft lay 2 junctions back. I could still reach the bridge through the secondary access corridor that ran past engineering. It would take longer, but it should have led me where I needed to go. I made it 3 junctions before I found another impossible room. Smaller this time. A bathroom or a medical cubicle. The fixtures blurred the line. Pipes and basins, a mirror that reflected the corridor behind me and left my body out of the image. The walls carried tile patterns in metallic plating, and in one corner stood a waiting room chair, the kind you'd see bolted to a hospital floor, now welded to a bulkhead instead. I turned around again. The ship's geometry had slipped out of consistency. Passages that should have met refused to connect. I would walk 30 meters in a straight line and arrive at a junction I'd passed 2 minutes earlier, approaching from a new angle. Some corridors leaned on me, gravity tugging sideways, pressing me towards certain walls or corners with a subtle directional pull. I found Yannick at the junction between sections 3 and 4. He sat against the wall with his knees drawn up, cargo specialist uniform half-sealed, eyes locked on something only he could see. His hands shook. "Yannick." No reaction. "Yannick, we need to get to the bridge." His lips moved, but no sound followed. I crouched beside him. His skin looked grey in the emergency lighting, slick with sweat. His pupils had blown wide enough to swallow his irises. "Yannick, can you hear me?" His mouth kept moving, forming the same shape over and over. I couldn't tell what word he was chasing. I stayed with him for close to a minute. His breathing rasped. His hands trembled. He never once acknowledged my presence. I stood and kept moving. The next person I found was Dr. Haas. She walked the wrong way, away from the bridge, toward the aft sections, with a measured stride that suggested a clear destination. Her medical kit hung from one shoulder. Her hair was still wet from the emergency thaw. "Doctor," she kept going. "Haas, Dr. Haas, where are you going?" She passed within arm's reach. Her eyes were open, focused, tracking the corridor ahead with intent. Something in her expression bothered me. I didn't understand what it was until she had already gone by. She looked peaceful. Not just calm or professionally composed. Peaceful in the way someone looks when they are deep inside a pleasant dream and unwilling to wake. I called her name twice more. She turned a corner and vanished. I let her go. I went back to procedure. Evacuation protocol, all crew to command stations, but the bridge refused to be reachable. 4 separate routes dissolved into impossible rooms or looping corridors. The ship had slipped out from under the map, and protocol said nothing about a vessel that no longer matched its own plans. So I fell back on the one location that existed for me as pure certainty, my monitoring station. I had spent 14 months in that room, 8 hours a day, watching the neural patterns of 10,000 sleeping colonists. I knew every console, every display, every cable junction and maintenance panel. I had made that walk from berth to station so many times my feet could trace it without help. The ship allowed that path. The corridors I took still felt off. Proportions off, lighting misaligned, gravity leaning across my shoulders. But they held their shape. Junctions stayed where they belonged. Doors opened onto rooms that matched the schematics in my head. 17 minutes after waking, I reached the neural storage monitoring station and stepped inside. The room had changed. The consoles remained. The monitoring displays, interface panels, rows of indicator lights that gave me a snapshot of every cryogenic pod in bays 1 through 12, all still in place. But the displays no longer showed what they were meant to show. Instead of readout graphs and numeric status indicators, the screens played images, moving images, low-fidelity video, rendered in the monitoring system's limited visual capacity. Faces appeared and dissolved. Places flickered past. A park, a kitchen, a hospital corridor, a beach under a setting sun. Voices I didn't recognize cut through in fragments that never formed complete conversations. I recognized some of the faces. I had watched 10,000 intake interviews over the past year. 10,000 colonists explaining why they were leaving, what they hoped to find, what they feared would go wrong. Their medical histories and psychological profiles had filled my off-shift hours. I had memorized their names without ever trying to. The faces on the screens belonged to them. I sat at the primary console and started diagnostics. The cryogenic pods worked as designed. Body temperature, metabolic suspension, cellular preservation. Everything sat comfortably within acceptable ranges. 10,000 colonists, frozen and stable, drifting toward their destination in textbook hibernation. The neural storage system did not match that stability. During transit, a colonist's brain runs too cold to sustain consciousness. The extraction process copies their neural patterns into a storage buffer, where those patterns remain static until thaw. Backup, primarily. A way to rebuild someone if the physical revival process fails. The patterns in the buffer are meant to sit there like frozen software. No change, no activity. The buffer sat in processing mode. I checked 3 times. I ran diagnostics on the diagnostic system. I pulled raw data from backup cores and compared it to the live stream. The colonists' neural patterns were active. They were running, processing, operating. They were dreaming. 10,000 people, bodies frozen solid, brains crystallized, copied consciousness running in the storage buffer as if on a server, dreaming simultaneously, dreaming together. The synchronization readout at the bottom of my display showed 97% coherence. 97% of the stored patterns operated in phase, responding to the same inputs, generating the same outputs. 10,000 people were sharing the same dream. I tried to contact the bridge. The communication system connected, routed my signal, delivered 3 seconds of dead air, then answered with the same looped fragment I had heard in my berth. "Look at me." I tried again. Same result. Secondary bridge channel, engineering emergency line, direct officer frequencies. Every channel connected, processed, and returned the same 3 syllables. "Look at me." I abandoned the bridge and opened navigation instead. The fugue had drifted off its plotted course. Telemetry showed the deviation beginning roughly 6 days earlier. Gradual, subtle, small enough that automated course correction should have handled it. The course correction had never engaged. According to its logs, the navigation computer believed we were on track, on heading, on schedule. The positional data argued otherwise. We had moved 3.2 million kilometers off our transit line. At our current heading and velocity, we would continue to slide for another 18 to 20 hours before. I cut that thought and pulled up CTA charts for the sector. I searched for anything within 500,000 kilometers of our projected path. The charts showed a single feature. Mindfold horizon, exclusion zone, no approach. Standard CTA notation for uncharted gravitational anomalies. No further details, no specs, just a name and a warning. The fugue floated 387,000 kilometers from the exclusion zone's outer boundary. We had been drifting toward it for 6 days. I stared at the synchronization readout. 97%. The colonists were dreaming in lockstep. The ship was reshaping around their dream, and we sat 400,000 kilometers from a phenomenon CTA forbade anyone to approach. I had no one to report to. Yennik stared at things only he could see. Haas walked towards something that made her look like she had reached the end of wanting. The bridge might as well have been in another universe. The ship's own shape had stopped cooperating. I was a neural storage technician, 3rd class. My job was to watch brain patterns and report anomalies to my supervisor. Somewhere in this maze, my supervisor existed as well, assuming the ship hadn't edited her out. And even if I found her, I had nothing to hand over that looked like a solvable problem. The synchronization readout ticked upward. 97.3. 97.5. I watched it climb while faces flickered across my displays, merging and separating, voices cutting in and out. The looped voice fragment kept cycling through the speakers, 3 syllables over and over, while I tried to decide what counted as a rational next step. 97.8. 98. The bulkhead behind me made a sound. It carried no mechanical rhythm. It didn't resemble stressed metal or venting pressure. The sound felt like a disturbance in water, a ripple, a soft displacement, coming from solid composite plating. I turned. The bulkhead moved. Its surface wavered like a reflection in a disturbed pond. The grey composite thinned, flowed, reshaping itself. A seam formed where the wall had been smooth. The seam widened into a gap, the gap deepened into a frame, and the frame filled with a door. A door now existed where, 30 seconds earlier, there had been hull plating. That bulkhead should have backed onto a sealed service void tight against the exterior shell. Light leaked around the edges. No red emergency wash. Something warmer, somewhere between gold and white, the color of daylight through a thin curtain. The synchronization readout hit 98.1%. The door held closed. The light behind it flickered. Awareness prickled across my skin. Something on the far side pressed back through that brightness, patient and curious. I left the door alone. Training covered hull anomalies and unexpected access points. Mark the location, notify command, wait for qualified assessment. No hands-on, no personal heroics, no curiosity. I had no qualified personnel. I had no command channel. I still had 12 years of conditioning insisting that whatever stood behind that door lived outside my job description. I turned my back on it and sat down at my console. The light shifted behind me. Warmer, then cooler, then warm again. I kept my eyes on the screen. The synchronization readout showed 98.2% and held there for a full minute. The climb had been steady since my arrival. Any pause counted as good news. I dove into the logs. The neural storage system recorded everything it touched. Activity patterns, synchronization rates, buffer temperatures, processing loads. 14 months of data, stamped every 30 seconds, mirrored in redundant archives. If this had a trigger, a pattern, any recognizable shape, I would find traces in those logs. I worked until my body stopped offering guesses about the time. The emergency lighting stayed red. "Look at me," kept circling the ship's speakers. The door behind me stayed shut. I drank from the emergency water pouch in my station kit and ignored my stomach. About 90 minutes in, the first correlation came into focus. The ship's damage logs had dutifully recorded the structural anomalies, walls that had moved, rooms appearing in empty volume, corridors losing their endpoints. Each anomaly had a timestamp. Each timestamp landed inside a 30-second window around a spike in collective REM activity in the neural storage buffer. The colonists were dreaming the ship into new shapes. The pattern wasn't random. That took longer to demonstrate, but it was there. I aligned the structural anomalies with the colonists' personal histories, the intake interviews, the biographical files, the memory samples CTA demanded for screening. The child's bedroom matched a pre-disaster photo from a passenger 7421, Constance Vella, whose daughter had died of a respiratory illness 3 years before departure. The bathroom with the waiting room chair matched an oncology ward where passenger 3089 had spent 18 months in treatment. The ship had begun turning into a collage of 10,000 lives, memories rendered in metal and composite, pulled from the colonists' collective unconscious and pressed into the hull. I kept going. The light behind me washed into blue, then into the pale yellow of a sunrise I hadn't seen in 6 years. I stayed at the console. The second pattern lived deeper in the data. Certain spikes in collective activity didn't lead to structural changes. They preceded localized gravitational fluctuations, the same sideways heaviness I had felt in the corridors, the way certain corners pulled at me. I mapped those fluctuations against the spikes and found a different alignment. These moments didn't correspond to memory architecture. They corresponded to something like focus. The collective wasn't only dreaming spaces, it was directing attention. Whenever enough neural patterns converged on the same target, the ship responded by bending gravity toward that point. The colonists had learned to lean. They were searching for something. I sat back and tried to absorb that. 10,000 people, dreaming together, focusing together, pointing the weight of their combined awareness at something. Not a memory, not a place, a direction. The door opened. The sound came again, the water ripple from composite, and then the faint shift of air. I turned. Dr. Haas stepped through the doorway. Her stride was steady. Her posture looked normal. Medical kit still slung across one shoulder. She appeared exactly as she had when I'd seen her earlier, except for her face. The peace there had deepened. Whatever she had found in that private dream of hers had completed itself. Her expression had the quality of someone who has reached the answer to a question that used to define them. "Doctor," she moved past me. "Haas, where are you going?" She didn't glance over. Her eyes tracked the path ahead with unwavering purpose. To her, I occupied no more space than a flicker on a faulty screen. She headed for the cryogenic bay entrance. I followed at a distance. The bay lay directly behind my station, sealed by a reinforced pressure door that needed both biometric and code authorization. Haas stepped up, keyed in a sequence without hesitation, pressed her palm to the scanner. The door cycled open. I stopped 20 meters back, far enough to retreat, close enough to see. She walked onto the main observation platform. The cryogenic bay was the largest single compartment on the fugue. 12 sub-bays, each holding about 833 pods in vertical columns from deck to overhead. 10,000 colonists, bodies suspended in perfect rows. The chamber changed as she stepped forward. Indicator lights across the visible pods shifted, amber to white. The change moved in a wave outward from her position, column by column, until the whole bay glowed with cold, steady light that hadn't existed seconds earlier. Haas stood in the center of the platform. She stayed still, facing the columns. The air inside that room loaded itself with presence. The feeling pressed against me through the doorway. 10,000 minds aligning on a single point. They were watching her. I had no visual proof. Everybody in those pods stayed frozen, every eyelid closed. The awareness still felt like pressure. 10,000 people, dreaming the same dream, all of them spending their attention on Dr. Haas. Her body started to change. Her posture shifted first. Her shoulders dropped in a way that looked almost human, but not quite. Her spine straightened too much. Her limbs lengthened a fraction beyond comfort. Her fingers stretched. Her neck gained a little more height. Her face softened. Lines smoothed out. Skin texture evened, like someone had taken a blur tool to her features. The details that marked her as a particular person faded. Her hair settled flat against her skull, individual strands losing definition. Her medical kit sank into her. The strap merged with her shoulder. The bag fused into her uniform, and the uniform began to soften into the same texture as her skin. 10,000 minds were remembering her, and the memory was simpler than the reality. Their shared version of her was overwriting the body she actually had. I eased back from the doorway. Haas stayed on the platform, serene and distant, while her proportions wandered further away from human anatomy. I couldn't tell if she felt anything or knew anything. Her face never lost that completion. I sealed the bay door. The lock clicked closed, a tiny sound against the weight on the other side. The door was rated to hold pressure and shrug off impacts. It had no rating for collective attention. It gave me a line to stand behind. I left the station. The maintenance corridors offered my best chance. They ran through the ship's spine, linking major systems and giving technicians access to infrastructure. Purely functional spaces. No windows, no decor, nothing personal. Memories attached themselves to parks and bedrooms and hospital wards. No one daydreamed about a junction box. If the colonists were pulling from their uploaded histories, the maintenance corridors might remain beneath notice. I moved carefully. The geometry stayed strange, angles off, gravity tilting from unexpected directions, but the corridors themselves held stable. No new doors appeared. No composite bubbled into furniture. I found an emergency comm unit at a junction where the main power conduit met the secondary cooling line. Hardwired, designed to function through almost any system failure. I woke it up and started cycling channels. The first 3 gave me the looped voice. "Look at me." The 4th delivered silence. The 5th. "Still here. If anyone can hear this, I'm still here. Section 4. Junction between 3 and 4. I haven't moved. I'm not going to move. If anyone..." "Yannick." A pause. "Mikkelsen?" "I'm in the maintenance corridors by the primary cooling runs. Are you still at the junction?" "I haven't moved." His voice sounded strained but lucid. More presence than he'd had on the floor. "Something's happening out here. I can see them." "See who?" "The colonists. Or they look like colonists. Hospital gowns. They keep walking past me." I pressed my back to the wall. "How are they walking?" "Their feet float a little above the deck. They just keep going. Their eyes slide past everything. They pass right through my field of view. No pause." "How many?" "At least dozens. Maybe more. I lost count hours ago. They just keep coming. Haas on the platform bathed in their attention, the lights changing for her, her body drifting toward their imagined version. Yannick, listen carefully. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move, don't call to them, don't try to make contact. What do you mean, make contact? They're searching. The colonists. Their patterns are running in the buffer, all tied together. When they focus on someone, things change. Change how? I watched it happen to Haas in the cryo bay. She walked in, all their attention swung to her, and her body started to match their idea of her. The dream took priority over reality. Silence crackled down the line. Yannick? They're ignoring me. His voice had gone softer. They drift past like I'm part of the wall. Good, you're uninteresting. Stay that way. For how long? I had nothing useful to offer. Mickelson, I've been sitting here for hours. I need water, food, I know. But movement makes you obvious. Right now, the safest thing you can do is be boring. Quiet. Just another fixture. He was quiet for a long breath. There's a supply station about 30 meters away. I could... Don't! It's close. I could grab a packet and come back before... Stay put. I'll look for a way to reach you. You just wait. Okay. He sounded unconvinced. Okay, I'll wait. I stayed on the line. Static stitched around his breathing. Somewhere in the ship, the looped voice fragment kept circling. Mickelson! Yeah. What are they looking for? The colonists. You said they're searching. I watched my portable display. 98.4% synchronization. I don't know. I've been trying to figure it out. 10,000 people together, all looking the same way. What do they all want? I thought of intake interviews. Faces flickering across the monitors. People explaining why they'd signed up to leave everything behind. 10,000 lives, each pointed at a different hope, now folded together into one process. Maybe they aren't chasing a specific thing, I said. Maybe they're just pushing their awareness out, trying to light up anything they can find in the dark. Yannick was quiet. I'm going to the supply station. No. I need water, Mickelson. My legs are cramping. I can't feel my feet. Give me time to... It's 30 meters. I'll move slow. I'll keep my eyes down. They haven't reacted to me yet. Maybe they won't. Yannick, stop. Rustle of fabric, the scrape of boots. They're still walking by. Still no interest. I'll just... His voice changed mid-sentence. The tension drained away. The fear, the edge of panic, the low animal need. All of it vanished. Oh! The word came out of his mouth, but the tone didn't belong to him. Gentle, welcoming. The sound someone makes when they finally spot what they've been searching for. There you are. The line went quiet. I stayed wedged against the maintenance corridor wall, comm unit pressed to my ear, static whispering. The ship echoed with a different phrase. Look at me. I found a junction box near the secondary cooling array where I could tap directly into the neural monitoring feed. The work took 20 minutes, splicing cables, rerouting data, convincing a portable display to accept inputs it wasn't meant for. When I finished, I had a handheld readout of the synchronization rate, 98.4%. I watched it for a while, then wedged myself into the corner where two conduits met and tried to think. The maintenance corridors still held. No new memories had rooted themselves here. The ship's industrial spine seemed dull enough to resist colonist attention. My emergency rations would stretch 3 days, maybe 4. Water was easier. The cooling system carried potable condensate through taps every 50 meters. But hiding remained a temporary solution. At some point, I would have to move. I pulled up navigation data. The fugue still drifted toward the mind-fold exclusion zone. At current velocity, we would cross the outer boundary in roughly 18 hours. CTA's notation gave no hint what crossing that line would do. Exclusion zone, no approach. Let your imagination fill in what happened to vessels that ignored it. I didn't need much imagination. Synchronization had climbed since I woke up. 97% at the station, 98 by the time the door appeared, 98.4 now. The closer we came to Mindfold, the sharper their alignment grew. If that trend continued, if the rate hit 100%, or we crossed some threshold, we would lose even the illusion of separation between colonists and ship. Protocols meant options. Options meant more than hiding and waiting. Engineering carried a secondary command station, a backup console for when the bridge couldn't function. It wouldn't give me navigation control, but it should hold emergency procedures, contingency plans for events similar to this one. Engineering wrapped the reactor. The reactor complex belonged to no one's personal history. A fusion core, shielding, coolant, standardized monitoring equipment, identical across the CTA fleet. No childhoods, no illnesses, no vacations. If any area of the ship could stay itself, it would be that one. I ate half a ration bar, drank from the nearest condensate tap, and started walking. For the first hour, the maintenance corridors obeyed their own design. Grey walls, exposed conduits, access panels stamped with CTA lettering. I kept my thoughts as blank as I could. I recited maintenance procedures under my breath. The steps for swapping a coolant filter, the sequence for resetting a neural buffer, the cryopod integrity checklist. Anything that kept my mind away from the colonists as people. Whenever I slipped and thought of Constance Vella's daughter or the oncology ward, the corridor seemed to gain weight. Gravity leaned harder against my shoulder. I learned to recognize that extra pull and drag my attention back to procedure. Coolant filter replacement. Step 1. Verify system shutdown. Step 2. Engage manual bypass. Step 3. The corridor ahead stretched longer than it should have. The distance to the next junction extended, as if the ship was sliding that segment away from me by a few quiet meters. I kept walking. Step 4. Remove filter housing cover. Step 5. Extract spent filter with approved handling equipment. Step 6. A park bench had welded itself to the wall on my left. It sat flush against a pressure door, all in ship-grade composite, painted to mimic wood grain. The angle of the armrests felt slightly wrong, edges too sharp, surfaces too clean. Someone's remembered bench, forced through the vocabulary of a bulkhead. I let it pass at the edge of my vision and kept reciting. The corridor behind me swallowed the bench and narrowed back to its usual shape. My portable display ticked upward. 98.6%. The closer I moved toward engineering, the more often I saw memory architecture bleeding through. Rarely in the corridor itself, more often behind open panels and cracked seals. A child's drawing traced in bundles of colored cable, crayon lines transformed into insulation. A glance through a maintenance hatch into a corridor that looked entirely like an endless church pew, the same bench repeated to the horizon. A room visible through a broken pressure seal that resembled a living room. Furniture fused to walls and ceiling. I didn't pause. I didn't investigate. I kept my eyes on the corridor and my thoughts on checklists. 98.7%. Corridors widened to accommodate equipment and evacuation flow. The architecture here matched the schematics. No extra rooms, bent junctions, or sideways gravity. The reactor's industrial presence seemed to interfere with whatever process distorted the rest of the ship. I found the secondary command station in a reinforced compartment off the main reactor access corridor. The door required a security code I technically lacked, but emergency protocols came with override sequences for when authorized personnel weren't available. I entered my ID, flagged the access as emergency necessity, and waited while the system decided whether to argue. The door unlocked. Inside, the station held a single console, a display wall, and 2 seats bolted to the deck. Backup only. Enough to pull data. Enough to access procedures. I sat and dug through the system for emergency protocols. CTA documentation was thorough. 14 months of transit had left me plenty of time to read standard operating procedures, maintenance guides, safety regulations. I had never gone into the classified contingencies, They lived in a restricted subdirectory. Access required my override again, and an acknowledgement that I understood I was entering classified territory. I confirmed both. The file title read, Neural Cascade Events, Emergency Response Protocols. I opened it. The language came in dry and precise, the tone of people who designed systems they hoped no one would ever need. The document described scenarios I'd never seen mentioned anywhere else. Mass neural corruption during transit, synchronized pattern degradation, emergent collective consciousness in stored populations. For each scenario, the file outlined responses. 3 options covered irreversible neural cascade with collective synchronization above 95%. Option 1, full cryogenic termination. Override life support in all cryogenic bays. Allow pod temperatures to drop until biological processes failed. The colonists' bodies would die in hours. Simultaneously, purge the neural storage buffers and erase all stored patterns. Implementation required manual confirmation at 12 separate stations throughout the ship, a safeguard against both accident and unilateral action. Option 2, emergency beacon with quarantine interdiction recommendation. Activate the ship's distress beacon on a specific frequency reserved for biohazard and consciousness contamination events. CTA would dispatch response ships automatically. They would assess from a safe distance. If they confirmed irreversible contamination, they would destroy the fugue. Implementation required 2 crew members to input code simultaneously. Option 3, neural isolation and reroute. Cut connections between individual neural storage buffers, breaking the collective's ability to process as a single entity. Each colonist's pattern would become a closed loop, sealed to its own pod. The colonists would stay alive. Their bodies would remain frozen. Their minds would keep dreaming, alone, indefinitely. I read the options twice. Then again, none of them offered survival in any meaningful sense. Option 1 killed 10,000 people quickly. Option 2 asked CTA to do it from a distance. Option 3 condemned 10,000 minds to solitary confinement until the ship lost power and everything stopped. I thought of Haas on the platform, face smoothing away, edges of her erased by consensus. Yennik's voice when it shifted into welcome. The colonists hadn't suffered a simple corruption. They had become something unified and aware. Waking them would mean handing 10,000 bodies to a single mind that already treated the ship as raw material. The pods didn't imprison them. The pods contained them. The console in front of me waited for a decision. My portable display showed 98.9% synchronization. 17 hours to the mindfold boundary. I didn't know which line to follow. Procedure had always protected me from that kind of choice. 12 years of checking boxes, following guidelines, reporting anomalies to supervisors. I had built a whole life around the idea that someone else bore responsibility for decisions that killed people. No one else remained. Just me, in a backup command station, staring at 3 catastrophic options and a deadline I couldn't move. Navigation confirmed our drift. No course corrections could be made from here. The bridge interface that could have changed our heading lay embedded in a section of ship I couldn't even reach anymore. We would cross the exclusion boundary in 17 hours regardless. Something would happen at that line. The rising synchronization, the dream architecture consuming the ship, the growing gravity focus, everything pointed in that direction. The mindfold pressed them toward completion. I had 17 hours to choose. Full termination demanded my presence at 12 stations. I would have to move through a ship that rearranged itself on the whims of 10,000 dreaming minds, input codes while their attention roamed. Possible, maybe. Probably suicide. Neural isolation required input from this console alone. A few commands and the connections would sever. 10,000 minds would each face an endless private dream. The beacon needed 2 crew members. I counted as 1. The lights dimmed above me. The change stayed minor, nothing like a full outage, but enough for my vision to notice. The reactor's vibration trembled, faltered, and resumed at a slightly different pitch. My portable display jumped 99%. I rose from the console automatically, my hand finding the emergency kit on my belt. Shadows in the room shifted in a way that didn't match the lighting. They seemed to respond to a pressure I couldn't feel directly. Footsteps approached down the corridor. These carried weight. The sound fit a human gait, boots on deck, careful but firm. I turned toward the doorway. A woman stood there. She wore a crew uniform with navigation insignia on the shoulder. Short, practical hair, a narrow face marked by fatigue that went beyond a single bad day. Her eyes were fully present. She looked at me and judged what she saw with the alertness of someone still in control of herself. "You're the one still deciding, aren't you?" I didn't answer immediately. She stepped inside, checked the corridor behind her with automatic caution, and sealed the door. "Polk." She tapped the insignia. "Navigation, third shift. I was in reactor monitoring when this started, about 6 days ago." 6 days. More or less. Ship time went sideways early. She crossed to a secondary console and pulled up displays I hadn't touched. "I saw you on the internal feeds, watching the maintenance corridors. You move carefully. That's good." I glanced at my display. 99% still holding. "How are you?" "Still myself?" She kept working. "Same method as you. Stay close to the reactor. Stay uninteresting. Don't dwell on colonist biographies. You figured that out on your own. I've had time." She brought up an internal camera feed. "Watch." The image showed a corridor I didn't recognize. A figure drifted down it in a hospital gown, feet hovering a few centimeters above the deck. A colonist body in motion. Something about the movement jarred. Limbs swung out of sync with each other. The head turned too far and snapped back. The whole figure moved like someone learning to drive a body from scratch. "That's from 6 days ago," Polk said. She switched feeds. Now 4 days ago. Same corridor, different figure, still floating, still in a gown. The movement had smoothed out, the limbs coordinated better. Head movements tracked in more natural arcs. And 2 days ago, another sequence. This one walked almost like a living human. The float remained, but the rhythm of the limbs had mostly settled into something that belonged in gravity. "They're practicing." I looked at her. "The collective," she went on. "Whatever they've become. They're using the crew as rehearsal suits." She closed the feeds. Haas wasn't the first. 2 engineers from night shift went before her. Early attempts looked clumsy. Lately they move with confidence. Every day they get closer. Every hour. She faced me fully. "They're doing more than sketching rooms into the hull. They're studying how to operate muscle and bone." "They intend to wake up." Polk nodded. "The pods keep their bodies frozen. The patterns in the buffer run free. And the closer we get to that thing out there, the mind fold. The more stable the collective becomes. Synchronization keeps climbing. When it reaches 100, or the ship crosses that boundary, or power fails, and the pods open by default, 10,000 bodies stand up with one mind behind them. And that mind doesn't strike me as the type that stays where it's put." I looked back at the console, at the 3 options lined up for judgment, at the 99% on my portable display. "You've read the protocols." 3 days ago, Polk said. "I've been waiting for someone with neural command access. Someone allowed to choose option 2. The beacon. CTA sends interdiction ships. They evaluate from range, confirm the threat, erase the ship. Standard response. The colonists. Those people signed up for a colony, not for this." Polk's tone didn't harden. It just settled. Whatever occupies those patterns now carries some memories, some habits, but the individuals are gone. I thought of Constance Veller's intake interview, the way her voice broke when she talked about her daughters last week. Passenger 3089, describing long oncology corridors and the taste of hospital coffee. 10,000 faces I had only ever seen on screens. What about the other two options? Polk pulled up a schematic marked with 12 icons. Termination means 12 confirmations across 8 decks, including areas where the ship no longer matches its own layout. You would have to walk through spaces the collective reshapes in real time. You saw what happened to Yennik. You watch that. I watch everything this station can reach. She pointed at the icons. Even if you knew exactly where these still sit, even if the geometry cooperated, the collective would notice you long before you finished. You'd never reach the 12th. And isolation? Keeps them locked into individual loops, keeps them dreaming. But we still drift toward mindfold on a fixed heading with no way to alter course. Eventually, systems fail. The pods open on their own. We end up right back at the starting threat, plus more time for them to learn. I glanced at the portable display, 99.2%. How long until we hit the boundary? 16 hours, Polk said. Maybe a little less. 16 hours. Enough time to pretend I would find a fourth option. Enough time to delay. If I don't authorize the beacon, then I keep watching from here until something bursts those pods open. She didn't bother with speculation beyond that. I thought about the colonists again. We had never spoken. I had never stood in a room with any of them while they were awake. Everything I knew came through data. Brainwave graphs, interview recordings, medical fields filled with numbers. 10,000 people reduced to patterns I monitored from behind glass. That distance had always suited me. I had taken this assignment because colonists slept the whole way and rarely caused trouble. 14 months of transit without conscious passengers, without emotional demands. Just data. Just work. That same distance now made the choice easier. I didn't carry memories of their voices beyond the screen. I hadn't watched them laugh or argue or make coffee. They remained entries in a database and shapes in a buffer. Whatever they had become together terrified me in a clean, abstract way. No trauma board would ever ask me to admit that. Okay, I said. Polk straightened. Okay. Option 2, the beacon. She moved to the console and brought up the authorization screen. 2 fields for 2 confirmations. I'll enter mine, then you. I nodded. She keyed in her ID, her code, her override. The system processed and replied, authorization 1 of 2 accepted, awaiting secondary confirmation. I stepped up beside her. The cursor blinked in my field. I entered my ID, my code, my override. Authorization 2 of 2 accepted. Activating emergency beacon protocol 773. The display shifted to a status view. Invisible signals began streaming into the black on frequencies reserve ships monitored. Beacon active. Estimated response time, 14 to 18 hours. Pods ready, Polk said. We left the station. The emergency life pod waited in a small compartment off the reactor access corridor. 2 acceleration couches, minimal navigation, supplies for 72 hours. Polk had already stocked it with extra rations, water, medical basics. We strapped in. Launch came on an automated countdown. Polk entered the ejection code. The pod ran a quick self-check, and then the mechanism kicked us away from the fugue with a burst of compressed gas. Through the viewport, the ship dwindled. From outside, the fugue still looked like a normal colonial transport. Hull intact. Running lights aglow, engines off but undamaged. Nothing in the gleam of her plating hinted at corridors that folded like paper or rooms from dead lives welded into her spine. Somewhere inside, 10,000 colonists continued their shared dream. Still synchronized, still practicing, still searching. They would never reach waking. The interdiction ships would arrive within the beacon's estimate. They would scan the fugue from range, confirm the neural cascade, and follow CTA protocol. The colonists' bodies would vaporize in controlled bursts. The storage buffer would wipe. The ship would shatter. I would need to tell someone why. I pulled my data recorder from its slot, standard issue for neural technicians, and opened a fresh file. Emergency report, Colonial Transport Fugue, Neural Cascade Event. Submitted by Mickelson, Neural Storage Technician, 3rd Class. Summary. During routine transit to colony designation Kepler 442b, the fugue experienced an unplanned course deviation resulting in close approach to the gravitational anomaly designated Mindfold Horizon, CTA Exclusion Zone. Proximity to the anomaly coincided with an irreversible neural cascade event in the colonist population, resulting in collective consciousness synchronization exceeding 99%. Ship crew were compromised by the synchronized collective's ability to restructure matter via focused perception. Standard response protocols were evaluated, and Option 2, Emergency Beacon with Quarantine Interdiction, was selected as the only viable response. The recorder waited for more. The report needed a timeline. Observations from the monitoring station. Correlations between REM spikes and structural changes. Haas on the platform. Yennick's final transmission. Polk's footage of practice bodies. I kept typing. Option 1, full termination, was assessed as non-viable due to the requirement for physical access to 12 separate stations located across multiple decks, including areas compromised by structural reality distortion. Option 3, neural isolation, was assessed as non-viable due to ongoing uncorrectable drift toward the mindfold exclusion boundary and eventual failure of shipboard power systems, which would result in uncontrolled release of the synchronized collective. Emergency Beacon Protocol 773 was activated via dual authorization from Navigation Officer Polk and Neural Storage Technician Mickelson. Both surviving crew members evacuated via emergency life pod prior to anticipated interdiction response. I read the draft. Every fact I had included was true. Every procedural justification matched the situation. A review board would read it and see a textbook application of CTA doctrine. The report carried a single lie. The decision was made after careful evaluation of all available options and consultation between surviving crew members regarding the ethical implications of each response protocol. Careful evaluation, ethical implications, consultation. Polk had made her choice days earlier. I had needed less than 5 minutes. We hadn't weighed anything in any formal sense. She had placed Option 2 on the table. I had agreed. The lie was small and familiar, standard language in emergency documentation, the kind of phrase that made lethal decisions sound like conclusions to long meetings. I saved the draft and set the recorder aside. Polk had already fallen asleep in the couch beside me. Exhaustion had finally collected its due. Her face slackened, her breathing settled. I turned my head toward the viewport. The fugue had shrunk to a bright point. The mindfold showed itself only as a distortion in starlight, a patch where the sky bent, where lines of distant suns curved into something my eyes didn't like. Somewhere in that space between ship and boundary, 10,000 minds kept dreaming together. They had learned enough to wear crew bodies like practice suits. In a different timeline, they would have learned more. The beacon kept broadcasting. The interdiction ships burned toward us on paths I couldn't see. I imagined the debrief. CTA psychologists would walk me through the script. They would ask how I felt about the colonists, the ship, the decision. I would give them the phrases they needed: grief, guilt, responsibility. They would nod and check boxes and clear me for duty. In time, I would sit at another monitoring console on another ship, watching another 10,000 neural patterns drift through transit. I would learn their names. I would log their anomalies. I would send reports up the chain. None of them would ever know what I had already chosen for the ones who came before. The pod drifted. The recorder's light blinked, committing my report to memory. Behind us, the beacon pulsed. The colonists dreamed, and the interdiction ships closed the distance. I didn't feel relief, guilt, or horror. I felt the same thing I always felt when a shift ended. The logs were complete and procedure had been followed. The work was complete.